Look at all these people.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Can see people trickling in, but I'll just start maybe and say welcome back everyone to day 2 of the National Conference. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Della, I'm the campaigns coordinator at Result. So I will kick us off today and then maybe Aaron will take over later on. So yeah, welcome. You can see a few more people coming. Nice to see all your faces. For anyone who doesn't know, we're starting off with the letter writing as gentle protest session today, which is going to run through till 3:30, but we'll take a short break in the middle. So, and for anyone who wasn't with us yesterday, just a bit of Zoom etiquette. Please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking, so we don't have background noise and interruptions. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat box, or we might give you an opportunity to unmute and shout them out a bit later as well, if you prefer to do it that way. I don't know if you've got anyone joining on the phone as in the telephone, but if you are, you can press *6 to mute or unmute yourself if you didn't know that. Yeah, so like I said, we're going to start off the letter writing as gentle protest session. So I'm joined by the lovely Sarah Corbett. Do you want to maybe give everyone a wave? Thanks, Sarah.
Hello.
So I'll just introduce her and say a few words before I hand over to Sarah. So for anyone who doesn't know, Sarah is an award-winning activist, author, Ashoka Fellow, who was raised in a low-income area of Liverpool. She's the founding director of the global Craftivist Collective, which provides craftivism or craft and activism products and services for individuals, groups, organizations to do effective craftivism under her gentle protest methodology, which we'll talk a bit more about soon. Sarah's work is super impressive. It's helped to change laws, policies, hearts and minds around the world. She also has a book, How to Be a Craftivist, The Art of Gentle Protest, which is out now if you're interested. So just to place this session in the context, I suppose, of the rest of the conference, which is hopeful campaigning in challenging times, the theme of the weekend. And I know for a lot of you guys and for me, it's been a difficult time to get hold of MPs and other decision makers. We've had to change the direction of some of our campaigns and replan how we do things. We've had to change how we meet up in groups and how we work with each other. So yeah, just wanted to thank everyone for all the work you've been doing during this kind of turbulent time, given COVID and everything else that's been happening in the world. Most of you will already know how important we at Result see personal correspondence with MPs and other decision makers. So in that light, me and Sarah have worked together to bring you this session, and Sarah's gonna tell you a bit more about how her methodology speaks to that resilience that we need as campaigners at the moment, and also how it might make us more effective in adapting to difficult circumstances in the future. So yeah, anyone who's just joined, this session will run until 3:30 and we'll have a 10-minute break at around 2:40. We'll start with Sarah, who will talk about her gentle protest methodology. And then after the break, we'll talk about these lovely packs that some of you will have received in the post. If you weren't one of the lucky people who registered in time, there is a PDF version of this pack. So we'll be chatting about that after the break. So I'll put a link in the chat box if you want to have a little skim, read over it in the meantime, so you know what we're talking about. Yeah, so I think I'll hand over to you now, Sarah. And thanks again for joining us.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I've said this many a time, but I'll say it again. I'm a big fan of Results UK. I'm always going on about how you're the best campaigners, which I say to other campaign groups, which probably don't like that. But because you're so thoughtful and detail focused and strategic. So I know I'm the last conference last time, so I'm so glad that you didn't dismiss me and invited me again, so thank you so much. We're going to try and squeeze in as much as we can in the 90 minutes with the 10-minute break, because if what I want is really at the end of it for you to be like, okay, that's a lot of information, but hopefully tonight and when you're reflecting and resting in the next week, it might connect some dots in your subconscious and your conscious of like, oh, okay, well, I think this element might help with this campaigning I'm doing. But I'm very much going to be focusing on the feeling elements of campaigning, which I feel like we often forget a little bit as activists, and also about the aesthetics and the senses. So I'm not going to talk about campaign strategy because you all of you already know that stuff. So I'm sort of having that as a given, and then my hope is that I'm just adding on extra elements that maybe you have forgot about or sometimes forget or don't make those connections. So I hope this session is just lots of information where you're like, okay, that was a lot to think through, but in your subconscious tonight while you're having a rest, it might bubble up with some questions or comments, and you'll get an email from Della, which is from me, next week or the following week, just with more information and my contact details. So if, again, any questions pop up that aren't answered, then in touch. The first bit before the break at 2:40, I'm going to go through craftivism in general, and then the second part is about letter writing, but hopefully there'll be elements in the first bit that connect with letter writing and also go beyond that as well. So I'm going to share my screen now and hope this works, and do tell me in the chat if it doesn't. So if I press play here, yeah. So basically, I'm talking about, first of all, what craftivism is, and I want to go through 5 ways I think craft could be really helpful for your own activism in different ways. For some campaigns, they might not be useful for other campaigns, and it's all context specific. So I run the Craftivist Collective, and these are our little labels which say made with courage and care, which is what it's all about. It's to make craftivism objects that are carefully done in terms of being thoughtful and strategic, but also compassionate and sensory and memorable. And also made with courage. So it's not, you know, about something that's really fun. It's more than that. It's fulfilling because it is challenging ourselves, and it is us, you know, standing up and saying about injustice that we care about. So we need some courage there, and we need some care, and having that balance between those two things. Just a quick overview. So for the Craftivist Collective, it's a global collective, it's an open collective, so anyone that takes part, I see them as part of the collective, and that means that people can take part on their own anywhere in the world with our kits and products and tools and books, either on their own campaign they care about, locally, nationally or internationally, or some of our projects are issue specific. So you can use them in different ways, and people can do it on their own in a bedroom without anyone ever knowing, or do it in a group that already exists, or with friends. But my role in the Craftivist Collective is to provide kits and tools and products and services to help people be the most effective craftivists they can be. Place other forms of activism, but to add to your activism toolkit. So these are just some of the tools that we offer people, and we sell in different shops. I specifically target areas where activism could be really useful for particular organisations, and where other forms of activism might not be able to fill that gap. So I'm really proud to say that I helped make the Girl Guiding Craftivism badge, which is the national UK badge, and that's done really well and is really popular. I work a lot with women's institutes because, as you'll know, they're highly influential. And there's a nice connection there with craft. So whereas I used to work with lots of other charities as a professional campaigner, we'd often contact women's institutes and say, oh, we've got this campaign, can you take part? And they, as you know, they're busy people and have their own campaigns as well, and they'll get a huge amount of emails from different campaign groups saying, can you help us with this, can you help us with that? And I noticed quite quickly on in my journey, which started in 2008, that women's institutes were coming to me and saying, oh, we really like your craftivism, can we join in, can we use your methodology for our own campaigns, or we like your campaign, do you want support? So craft was to be a real hook to engage hard to reach audiences, but also audiences that get reached a lot by people, and it sort of cut through and made it more noticeable for different groups. So I do a lot with museums and galleries where we'll link in with a particular exhibition theme around social change, or a particular date in the diary, whether it's Refugee Week or International Women's Day and different dates. And we'll often do drop-in or timed workshops in museums and galleries to reach their audience, and then bring them along on a campaign journey to then take other actions. So I see Craftivism as a really useful tool for particular collaborations. There's only one of me that runs this moment, so I have to be pretty picky on where I have capacity. So it's often focusing on where other forms of activism can't go into, where Craftivism is a bit of a softer sell, or more like soft power, or sometimes it might not be very specific in terms of its campaign action and ask like it will be for results, but we can give people a general idea and then offer different actions that they can take with different charities. So it's a really good bridge in terms of working with different organisations, and also in terms of the media. So you'll see a little collection there of different magazines and books. And one great thing about activism through craft is the craft is a hook for a lot of creative magazines and creative books who want to engage people in social change, but they need to show their audience, their audience have come to them to be creative. So that comes first, and then the social change comes in afterwards as a nice excuse to talk about it, because the visuals fit the aesthetic of those different magazines and different books and different websites. So again, it is that the craft is a really great way to collaborate and reach new audiences, existing audiences, and always tailoring the campaign to fit that audience rather than shoehorn. And this is an important issue that everyone should care about. That doesn't really work, because we're all, at full capacity most of the time, and we need to be starting with what does that audience engage with, and how can we tailor our campaign to attract them, inspire them, and engage them. And craft, when I'm talking about handicraft, is an incredible way that it has so much flexibility that you can be bespoke with it and change the aesthetics. So if there's one thing that I want you to leave from this first part of the session, is to see Craftivism as a tool in the activism toolkit. It's not to replace other forms of activism. So I'm still absolutely encouraging you to have your one-to-one conversations with your politicians and your councillors, and doing all of your events and your letter writing and your emails, all of that brilliant stuff that you're so great at. Keep doing it. But also I want you to see this as, sometimes this is a really useful tool in your toolkit. So this is my rusty toolkit. And I want you to leave thinking, okay, whatever campaign I'm working on, when could Craftivism be the tool to pick out at a certain time for a certain audience, for a certain goal, as part of your activism strategy? And that's why I'm going to go through 5 ways craft can help with your long-term activism at certain times and certain contexts, but also to challenge you, especially if you enjoy craft. This isn't me saying, if you love craft, only do craftivism. I love to craft, but a lot of my activism is not craftivism, because it's not always the right tool to use. So if you feel like you're thinking, oh, this is a great way, I love to craft and I really care about being a change maker, be aware of your motives, and your motives really need to be, the priority is serving the cause, and where can craft serve that cause rather than craft as the taskmaster. That's my little challenge for you all. So a bit about me, which I always think is really important when I'm nosy. I always want to know, who is this person talking at me and why should I be listening? So there's a little child who's 3 years old on the right of this image, and that's me. with a mullet. My mother used to cut our hair. So I'm from Everton in Liverpool, and this is the front page of our local newspaper in '87. And you might be able to see the sign behind the row of housing that were all boarded up, says save these houses. So age 3, I was squatting in social housing to save the housing from demolition with my community, a very white working class area. And it says pulpit power because you'll see on the image on the left, the Bishop David Shepherd and his wife Grace are there, and Montessori Dunn is there to represent the Catholic Church as well. We had people of all faiths and none involved. My dad is still the local vicar, minister in Everton, and my mum was a nurse, full-time mum, and now is a local politician. So I grew up where most of our meals we talked about religion and politics, unlike a lot of families where you avoid those. And I saw inequality firsthand, and I was involved in campaigns from an early age on local issues, but also on global, like South Africa apartheid. And I went to South Africa when I was 8 years old as part of my dad's sabbatical to learn from the peace and reconciliation work that was happening there. So I'm absolutely passionate about how can we be effective activists? How can we be of best use to serve social causes and make a real long-term difference? And that's what I'm really geeky about, and I think a lot of you are as well, and nodding away, which is great. I do craft because I feel like it's a really useful tool in the activism toolkit, but my background is all about how can we be effective activists? How do we make sure that we link in with psychology and how the brain works, with neuroscience, with every element of the world? I always try and think, okay, what colours do we need to use to engage people long term and inspire them to take ownership of an issue that they can be part of, helping if they're decision makers, if they're directly affected. I grew up being part of all of these different campaigns where I learn from lots of mistakes, but also see the importance of thinking through all of the elements that I'll talk about now. So I put in award-winning campaigner because if anyone says, oh, I had this craftivism session yesterday, and people go, oh, that sounds a bit fluffy and weak and you know, naive, it has helped, as Della said, it has helped change hearts and minds and laws and policies. And I wouldn't be doing gentle protest craftivism if it didn't work. So I only do it because it does have impact, and I'm always trying to hone my craft and learn how to do it better so I can share and train lovely people like yourselves. So the first out of the 5 elements I want to talk through, there's lots more elements, but I think these are the most important and hopefully relevant to you as campaigners, is when I'm talking about craft, I'm talking about handicraft. So I'm not talking about machine embroidery, I'm not talking about glasswork or woodwork or other handicrafts where you use lots of machinery and there's a risk of you hurting yourself. You can hurt yourself by pricking your finger or doing something little with your hands, but it's not too bad. So what I noticed when I was on a train to Glasgow 12 years ago as a burnt out activist and doubting the effectiveness of a lot of activism was that the craft, I was doing a cross stitch kit on the train and it was about this big and I'd never done it before, but I YouTubed a little video and I read the instructions. And the first thing I noticed was when separating the thread, you can't really do it fast without breaking it or making not. There are faster ways to do it now, but I don't teach that in my workshops. It naturally, you can't do it fast because you might create some tension in your thread, or even when you're doing paper craft as well. It naturally slows you down because you're using your head with your hands together. You're using often soft material, which naturally calms us down because it creates a safer space. So craft as something that slows you down, it's really, I found that such a compliment to me thinking about social change. Because when we think about social change, when we see an injustice that we care about, we naturally either get incredibly angry or incredibly sad or somewhere in the middle, and we want to react. We get emotions, as we should have emotions. But as Gandhi and Martin Luther King and, you know, huge change makers around the world throughout history really tell us in all of their books and their and we need to channel that anger and sadness into proactive and not just be reactive. And use and craft, I felt like was one of the first times ever that as an activist in my professional life, but also my personal life, I slowed down, and it slowed down my inner monologue to go from, this is awful, what am I going to do? What's the point? I need to do everything. I can't do anything. All of those thoughts that I'm sure you all resonate with. By slowing my hands down and doing a repetitive hand action, it naturally calmed me down, which then meant that I went from fight, flight, or to be able to be much more constructive in my thinking of, okay, what can I actually do? Why is this injustice happening? What are the root causes? Who's involved? Who are the power holders? Who are those directly being affected? Who do those power holders listen to? How could I engage that audience? If I was a power holder, what's stopping me from being part of the solution? Am I too busy? Am I not connected to that issue? It gave me time to ask big questions without going into despair, because you're using your hands while you're thinking. So there's lots of evidence now from neuroscientists and clinicians about how if you use your hand in a repetitive action, it really helps you think more critically, more empathetically. It calms you down so you can be more focused and more clear. And it really helps, I think, with that activism beginning of going from reactive to proactive. When we're reactive, we then wish we'd our words that we just blurted out. So it really helps you think more critically, but because you're doing something with your hand, it also really helps confidence. So find cell work, do handicraft work for prisoners, mostly male prisoners, and they teach them handicrafts, mostly cross stitch and embroidery, to do in their cells, and they have so many testimonies and evidence now of how it helps with confidence. It helps with lessening suicide rates, with self-harm, because you're using your hands in a productive way rather than just sitting there in a bit of a, in a downward spiral. It helps with depression, with anxiety, it helps with anger management. So there's lots of evidence of how it helps with mental health, with physical health, and with critical thinking. And I think for us as activists, what an incredible tool to help us figure out, oh, you're on mute, sorry, and I picked on you, so feel free to say, go away.
I'm not going to say that, it's okay. Yeah, no, I noticed it straight away. Because it was handwritten. I dropped a message in the chat like a few seconds ago being like, hey, is handwritten or printed, do you find they more effective? And I'm about to answer my own question, so feel free to ignore that. But I immediately noticed it was handwritten, so I was like, okay, I've immediately got to pay more attention, because clearly someone cares enough to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly it isn't just a mass-produced corporation that's just like, yo, sign up. So I read that, I was like, that's really cute. Saw the seal, was like super cute. Opened it up and saw even more personalization, because you had the full hunter with admiration. And that's, the fact that you then go through every single person bit for whoever, and it's handwritten. So it just made you feel really special, like it's for you. And everything on there just felt like an added extra touch of personalization. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that. It's really helpful. So yeah, all of you should have received your little letterpress cards, which I didn't. I was gonna put PS. These, which is true, these are made in the Letterpress Collective in Bristol on offcuts of German paper. And so the letterpress, again, that touch and that feel and that old school design that Nick Hans did for us of the quote, I really wanted to explain all that. And sometimes I'm like, right, I just need to stop writing too much. Sometimes less is more. And Della will know my first document I wrote you was quadruple the length. So I managed to cut that one down. But it is, again, getting that balance of, I could have told Nick to letterpress with admiration and a plate of my signature. But like Hunter said, I thought, well, it's extra work for me to write with admiration, but it's those extra few seconds or minutes that, yes, it'll take me longer, but I know that's where the power is. You know, I was really keen not to just have it without your physical name on. I was really keen on the front of the letter that I wrote to. So these extra bits where you're like, they didn't have to put to with a little squiggly line under, didn't have to use a calligraphy pen. It's not calligraphy, but it is a calligraphy pen. Those little things, sometimes we don't even notice, but we can feel something. Sometimes we don't know how to express it, or why we feel hopeful, or why we have this warm feeling, but it does create those feelings. And even with the embossed stamp on the back, which hopefully you can just about see, that's my own handwriting that I then got made into a stamp. So again, I could have done it with typewriter font or a normal font, but again, when you see people's handwriting, all of our handwriting is unique. So you automatically, if you're reading a screen in Times New Roman, your eyes flutter across the page because we're used to that font. It's a default font. So we flutter across the words and our brain connects the gaps. When you read someone's handwriting, your brain goes, oh, I don't know what these shapes are. So it's a millisecond of a difference, but your brain then starts reading across. When you read across, it's more soothing and you're doing it in a slower way, and you are automatically seeing the feelings that someone's wrote it in. So you can see that hopefully you'll see that I haven't rushed the writing. It's not really spiky, which makes you feel like it's aggressive. It's not, it's a bit curly. So when you do curly handwriting, it's seen as less aggressive and more cozy and more warm, coming back to what Cameron said. And even little things. So here's my little, very small thing, but if you go up at the end, or you'll see on this one, I've done a smiley face high up, and some of your letters, it goes up, my signature goes up at the end. If you go up at the end, your eyes, because they're going up, whatever you're saying, you actually feel more hopeful. So even if you're having a sentence, Jamie's giggling there, even if you have a sentence that says, I don't feel good today, if you write it, there we go, if you write it up, your eyes go up and you don't feel as down. If you read it with the writing going down, your visuals go, oh, look, someone's sad. So there's really small little details that it's not about manipulation. It's about how can I encourage someone to be hopeful, empowered, and remember the great stuff in the world and how we can build more of it. It's those little things that I was thinking, okay, I want yellow, I want the wax seal, I want the embossing. When you engage in 2 or more senses, you remember something more. So you touch on that, and you're touching the letterpress, which again is quite different. It's not cheaply done. So again, this is a balance of, you don't want to spend money that you don't have on a credit card with luxury stationery. You don't want it to be so luxurious with gold everywhere that your politician receives a gold-plated letter, and you're talking about inequality and poverty. You know, there's sensitivity issues there, and we all innately know, the right balance, really. And a bit like Hunter said, you answered your own question, because you do innately know that by handwriting someone's name, it's much more impactful than printing out a card on cheap paper. So trying to get that balance of, can you have textured resources? Can they be as ethical as possible? And you can celebrate those ethics, but not making it so expensive and luxurious that it looks like you're more interested in the stationery than the content on the stationery itself. That was my longest question, and then the next question that Naveed will put up in the chat is, so any other comments people want to make quickly, even if it's just one word that they want to put in the chat or say out loud, and then we'll go on to the next bit.
Yeah, just to go against the stream, when I opened it up and I saw, for Peter, with admiration, Sarah Corbett, I sort of went, who the fuck?
Fair enough, yeah.
And it was like, I thought it was some kind of a scam. Okay, yeah. But then I thought, no. Then I read the letter, and then it was obvious what it was. But it was like, because I do get a small amount of fan mail, maybe one every 10 years, and it wasn't the name I recognised. So,
oh yeah. And that's really helpful. What I'm glad you didn't, what I was worried you say is, what is this? And I'm going to close it and put it in the bin. But the fact that it intrigued you enough to then read the sheets, I still see that as a win. And you probably remember it maybe than spam mail or I still get my bank statements through the post, because that's the way I like to do my, but that, even if people are like, oh, this, because you're intriguing people at the end of the day, which is a really important element, is it enough that people might go, oh, I hate yellow, and oh, this is so kitsch, and who is this stupid person? But you still intrigued enough to read on. If you weren't, I'd be really, if anyone here was like, I put it in the bin, I just didn't like it, do share that with me in email or here, because we want to mitigate as many risks as possible that people don't read on. You want to do something that intrigues people to go, this is confusing, this is odd, what is it? Ideally, you want a response of, this is exciting, this seems warm and loving, and what is it? But that's still a really, I'd still see that as a win, Pete.
Okay, got it.
I also don't think there's much worry of most of us confusing it with fan mail. I haven't ever received fan mail before, so I was quite certain that I knew what I was receiving. So maybe
it's important to remember, and I think especially when we're talking about politicians. So I, a few years ago, my friend was a special advisor, and I said, I did a massive a national campaign with a charity, and I really wanted feedback from politicians who we were engaging. So I said to my friend who was a special advisor, can I pay for beers in the bar in the House of Commons, which is highly subsidised by us taxpayers, so thank you very much, and can you get a couple of staff members from the different major political parties that you know, where I can say what worked and what didn't with our campaigns. And it was so enlightening, because I didn't know a lot of what I'm sharing with you now. A lot of it came from them, and then I looked more into the neuroscience, psychology and design thinking and all of that. And straight away they all said that, one, they preferred receiving gifts. Most of them preferred receiving gifts in person, because have a photograph with their constituents and say, look at the gift I've received, and they could pin it up on their pin board, whether it was in their local office or whether it was in the House of Commons, to point to journalists and other politicians and stuff and say, look what gift I received, whether it was hand embroidery or whether it was a letter or something. They really liked it to say, look what my constituents engage with me and they like me. But it also, if you're challenging them on something, even if they're displaying it, if they're not doing what you're asking them to do, just by having that on display, it does remind them with their busy schedules, like, oh, okay, haven't done that thing that they're asking me for. So it does remind them a little bit more. The second thing was that they said when they received anything in the post from us, because some of our craftivists couldn't meet their MP in person, I said to everyone, put it in a coloured envelope, ideally something like a hopeful yellow or a turquoise or a purple, because they're all seen as quite, turquoise and purple are seen as luxury colours. So again, brings that value into it rather than bright red or, more like you wouldn't put a neon colour in. And the MP staff, they really liked it because around, I'm sure a lot of you know this, around 2 to 4 o'clock, like all of us, will be a bit tired and feel a bit overwhelmed by all their emails and all their meetings and being asked lots of. My mum's a local councillor, so she was always feeling like, you know, people are asking things of her and gets overwhelmed. And they said that they keep the gift to give to their MP when they were a bit grouchy at that time of day and say, oh, here's this thing that you might not have seen, and it's really positive and encouraging, and it will be challenging, but in a respectful way. So it broke up the day and also again made it memorable, made them more likely to, if the staff saw an email from you, they're more likely to answer it because they've had a positive engagement with you before. So that links in with having positive surprises, so good surprises instead of bad surprises. If you think a lot of some activism, you have surprises, but they're often negative surprises. So that feeling of negativity, whether it's having a milkshake thrown at you, having someone pop up at your office with placards or at one of your events, you then automatically think of that organization or that person as they made me feel shocked, scared, attacked, judged, like a bad person, demonized, these bad feelings. If you give someone a letter or a gift, it's a surprise and it creates dopamine in that person. So that that politician and those staff, whether they realize it or not, whenever they see your name or they see you, they literally, their body goes, I know that person, they gave me dopamine, I want more dopamine. So they naturally are more likely to open your email, want to meet you because they feel trust and they want dopamine subconsciously. So it's quite an important element to think of, am I creating a good surprise or a bad surprise?
Who doesn't want dopamine?
Who doesn't want dopamine?
Should we combine the next couple of questions maybe,
yes,
just in the interest of time?
Yeah.
Amazing. Go ahead.
So the next question is, it doesn't matter if you haven't read your document yet, if you haven't received it, there's still time to read it afterwards and in the PDF as well. But the next questions are, what did you think about the example letters? So were there certain bits you found really powerful and engaging? Did you think they were well crafted? Would you like to share any particular phrases that the 3 examples used? And if you haven't read them, think back of, are there any letters or cards or gifts and correspondence that you've had with people in the past that have helped you change mind or change, you know, made you connect with an issue more or changed your habits or actions or your mindset? So they're the questions of, how did it make you think about those issues? Yeah, how to craft a effective letter.
Does anyone want to jump off mute or pop anything in the chat on whether there are particular parts of the letter examples that you liked or any other tips that you have for letter writing? Maybe, yeah, go ahead, Pete.
I'd like to ask about the letter to the Prime Minister.
Churchill from his wife.
Yeah, I was repelled by it. I mean, I thought, crikes, that's a bit heavy duty. And I was wondering if you could talk about that and how that fits your model.
Can you explain what you mean by heavy duty?
One of your men told me that you're being disliked and subordinates because of your rough, sarcastic and overbearing manner. Now that is kind of making him wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's not making him wrong directly, it's making him wrong in the eyes of others. In other words, it's like a group make wrong.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I don't see how that can be empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what's interesting with, you know, about the nonviolent communication, which I mentioned in the document as well. And it's interesting reading Marshall Rosenberg's books, because he doesn't say, use these words, not these words. It's not that easy to swap. It's all about context. So in this context, it's his wife talking to him. So you can be a little bit more cutting because it's his wife who, one, writes regularly letters to him. So they're used to having that discussion. What I quite like about that element is she's one of the men in your entourage has been, so she's saying this person thinks that. So it's not an absolute of you've done this. It's, this is something that has come to me. And then talking about the description of being overbearing manner, you wouldn't want to put that into, if you don't know your MP or know the power holder you're engaging, you wouldn't put that. But if you did know them quite well, you could think, okay, if they're not already listening to me, can I be a little bit more bold? Do I know them enough to do it? But you'd also she's wrapped that statement in my, you know, she starts with my darling. So that neutralizes it a bit more. And she ends with one bit that I don't particularly like as a woman. She says, please forgive your loving, devoted and watchful Clemmy. So, you know, which is, I feel is a little bit, you know, the power dynamics are below, but because she's wrapped it up in love and respect, you can be a bit more bold. And often we talk about, sorry for my phrase in here, but we talk about the bullshit sandwich, you know, again, lots of nods there of you say something really brilliant to say, look, I love and respect you, but I'm struggling with this bit. But just to end with, I think you're great. So, you know, this is actually not part of what you normally do. I know you as a loving person. So what are you doing here? You're being a little bit bleep. So I think you've got to look at the whole thing of, okay, yes, you can take, and nowadays we're so used to taking out a phrase or a sentence and then using it for cancel culture or for extreme wokeness of, well, they said this 7 years ago. Try and see it holistically of, if I read the whole thing, one, if that came too early, Pete, you might close off and go, I can't be bothered with this you're saying. But because she started with my darling, I think we can learn from that to say, you know, if you know your MP, I know my MP really well, so I can now say, hey Meg, which is quite nice, whereas I would start by saying, dear Meg Hillier, my MP. So it really is looking at that case by case, context by context, but trying it and having that language around, always reminding them that you do value them as a human and you respect them as a human, but you are wanting to challenge them. And we've got 3 examples for people who haven't seen them, which is a very positive one about hope to a mentee. The second one is the one between Churchill and his wife. And then the third one is the long letter from Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King, where instead of having the whole letter, we've just got some bullet points of key phrases and key techniques he's used to do that gentle protest. Don't know if that's fully answered has that helped, Pete, or anyone want to add?
It might be good to hear from anyone who hasn't spoken yet, and if they had any thoughts on any of the letter examples, if anybody wants to unmute themselves, or otherwise we will move on to just talk about the challenge, I think, unless you had
and just to say as well, we'll download the chat and we can include that in the email so that you've got all of that if you want to read it in the future. I will, because I'm a geek.
Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to share on what might have inspired them in any of those letter examples? Or otherwise, it'd be good to hear later on. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jill.
Yeah.
When I campaigned with Amnesty International, they used to do workshops on different things, and one of them was meeting your MP, so that you were actually the MP, and they gave you a quick list of what to do and say, and they said always end with on a positive note, on a thing of hope. Make the punter feel happy.
Yeah,
that's what they said. Always end making the punter feel happy.
Which is exactly about feeling, isn't it? Yeah. How do you make people feel? Yeah. So on our handkerchiefs and a lot of our letters, we end with yours in hope. So it's a bit of a challenge to say, look, I'm hopeful that you'll do something. So it's hope count, but it's also saying, I believe the best in you, not the worst of you. So again, it's putting yourself in the shoes of that power holder and saying, especially if you know them, you know, if Boris Johnson is your MP, including a quote from Churchill will be much more exciting to him than if you sadly include a quote from someone that he doesn't admire so much. And so it's trying to make it as bespoke as possible to them. So it's not so much about you of, I love this quote, I'm going to include it, but will that work for them? Some politicians will go, oh, this is far too sweet, and want to just like have something a bit bolder. I know as a Scouser, I have a good giggle with some people, and some people find it a little bit attacking when I take the piss out of them. They don't see it as a compliment as what I'm giving them. They'll be like, oh my word, I'm not used to that culture. So really thinking, always starting from their point of view and working back. So it might, you might think that, okay, my MP will love that if I say, hello, Tottenham Hotspur supporter, I hope you're recovering after an awful game yesterday, because they're playing Everton today, just saying, I think. And you already know you, that'll make them laugh. If you make someone laugh, they remember you much more as well, which is another thing. If you're doing any talks, do one little joke and people will be like, oh, I liked them, they made me laugh. So there'll be little bits that, again, sort of trust yourself. You know, I really do believe we all have this innate wisdom of how I feel and how would they feel. They're different to me, but the more, even if you don't know your MP, you can Google them, to watch videos of them. How do they talk? What language do they use? How do they present themselves? What's their background? What makes them tick? What do they love? You know, if they love nature, use some words around nature, around flourishing, around growth, because they'll connect to that. If they love systems and industry, you can use words of like, this is really productive, and this is really efficient, and this is a really streamlined way of doing something. Try and use the language that they use, because then it gets them to feel like you're really talking to them as a person and not just as a faceless MP. I'd love to hear from people about if you've ever received a letter or a card or a gift that has come with a bit of a challenge. Has it changed the way you think or done something? Has anyone got any little experience? It could be an email as well if it's about the wording. It could be the feeling of the presentation.
I think we've got a lot of experts on changing people's minds here, but maybe not people who've had their minds changed by others.
Challenge,
I read a lot of amazing letters from all of you to others. So yeah, does anyone?
I think that's also a good challenge. If you haven't changed your mind in the last 5 years about anything, that's quite an interesting observation, possibly.
There's still time. Just in the interest of time, so we are, I think, going to run over a little bit, but I would like to keep it to 5 minutes or less so we can respect the break for everybody. So why don't we address some of the questions in the chat box, and then I will quickly wrap up with what the challenge is and how you can let us know if you've done it or not. I'm seeing some nods. So we have got a couple of nice questions. Let me start with one from Bentley. If we're writing to MPs over periods of years and months on ongoing issues, how would you keep their interest engaged? Do you have any techniques that can help build campaigns over long periods? And maybe I'll just throw a second one at you if you can remember two answers at once. Let me just go a little bit back. Pete's asking if your book includes any details about neurobiology at all.
Yeah. So first question, yeah. And one thing that I did with the Successful Living Wage campaign with M&S Bentley, there's two of you there, isn't there? So I don't know who's who. But one thing...
It's my question, actually. Sorry, Sarah, it's actually our partner's question, Wendy's.
Wendy, brilliant question. So one thing we did there, and I've done it for other campaigns as well, is you do a bit of a reveal of one thing. And ideally, if you can, you know, a handkerchief works really well because it takes hours to make, and you do a handwritten letter with it, and it's even more strange because it's a handkerchief. There's a pun in there about don't blow it, which creates a little giggle. So when we did that as our main thing and we hand delivered them, we then, and that was at the AGM, which was around May time, we then tried to get the meeting, which we did in the summer. And then one way to keep them engaged with the living wage was we made handmade Christmas cards that were saying, all we want for Christmas is the living wage. We knew we'd already had some meetings with them, and they were pushing back on certain things, so we had more meetings, but we thought this will be a fun thing to open up. So we said to people more than just the 12 people who made the 12 handkerchiefs for the board, we said to a bigger group, we'd love you to do a Christmas card to the CEO saying all we want for Christmas is the living wage. Handwritten, quite fun, also a nice nudge. So that's a good reminder, Wendy. And then we were getting further and we were getting hopeful, but we also used Valentine's Day to say all we want for Valentine's Day is the real living wage for your employees that we love. So we had these cultural moments that we sort of hijacked. So it was quite playful, but it was also saying, we're holding you account here and you haven't done it yet. So it's getting that balance of, oh, come on, you haven't done anything for months, but we're nudging you because we're not going away. But we didn't do it every month on the same day. It would look automated. It would look like spam. It's not very loving because we know that politicians have a huge amount of things to do. So you can find cultural days, UN days. Cultural days are often better than UN days because it makes it look more about social proof and more about just general relevance in the world. So I like card, like, but we made sure that we spent hours on these handkerchiefs. We spent less time on the others, because if we sent them another handkerchief that took 10 hours, it could dilute the impact of the first one. Yeah. So they were always a little bit different, but they still had the handwritten element. We did lots of, some people did collage because they were nervous to draw. Some people painted because they liked it. So having that framework around really helps, especially when you're talking about long-term campaigns. You're always plotting, okay, what am I going to do at certain times when they're going to vote? What are we going to do there? Maybe that's in with lots of people outside Parliament, which I know you've already done many times with your banners. What do we do in the constituent? What do we do at certain times? And see craftivism as one tool to add to your holistic strategy. And then in terms of the neuroscience, it's a great excuse for me to do a really cheesy plug. So there is positive psychology and neuroscience in the yellow book, which Jill held up before, which is great. But I'm actually going to be crowdfunding from Tuesday next week to book. So it'll be 20 craftivism projects that specifically have neuroscience for every single project, and have the why to as well as the how to, and we'll have different essays within the handbook, which will be more like a coffee table larger book that goes through every single project, goes through how it's worked for different issues and different sizes. It'll include the neuroscience Dr. Daniel Glazer, who used to be the columnist for The Guardian on neuroscience, lovely guy, and will include some of the positive psychology as well. So I've learned from the yellow book that the way to complement that and add to it, Pete, is to be much more specific on here's the methodology and the case studies, and here's the practical handbook with all of the how to and the why to. So if we crowdfund that, then I'll make the book and it should be out the following year. So that's my little plug to look out for.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll try and drop a link into your website as well, so if anyone hasn't seen. We'll take one last question, I think, from the chat, which is one from Hunter, a really practical one. Can you knock on the door of their office? I'm assuming you mean an MP, Hunter, and just give them a gift or letter? Do you need to make an appointment to give them something like that? Mm-hmm.
So you can, but they're probably going to be busy and they might not be there. I will challenge you first and say, put yourself in their shoes. When you have someone that turns up at your door and you're quite busy, your feeling might be, oh man, I don't have time for this. Who are these people? You get a bit nervous. So I'd start from, what's the best way that they'll engage with it? And actually, often counterintuitively, a lot of politicians, if they're not as well supported, sometimes it's better to post them something and then go meet them rather than meet them and then post something. And only you will know that from doing your research. Sometimes just and say, look, I've made this thing. Could you let me know would they like to see me? And you tell me the slot of when they can see me. Or would it be better to put it in the post? And then, because it is really lovely, so I don't want to scare them off. And then you can say, if you want me to come over, maybe ask them the question, because again, that's probably not what they're used to. People say, I'm a constituent, I demand this now. And we're all in our own little world and forget other people have other things to do. So I'd probably ask the staff. I did a thing recently where I gave a gift to my MP around Lives Matter. It was a heart for her or a team to wear. Doing amazing stuff on that anyway. But I posted it to her, and like I mentioned in the first bit, I emailed and said, where do I post this? We're in lockdown. Are you allowed to post? Is it going to office? Is it going to Parliament? Is it going to your home? They already knew me, so they said, oh yeah, Meg will have it, send it to this address. And then I nudged them and said, have you received it? And they were mortified that they hadn't replied. They were like, yes, we have, and we're so sorry we haven't replied, which actually gave me a bit of power to say, no worries, but I made you for this reason. Handwritten note to say why I'd given it. But that's comes back to Wendy's question, the way of just keeping that relationship going. The practicalities of, if you're a constituent, you can say, I would like to meet you, and they really should be offering you a slot in their surgeries. My first MP, who was Conservative, she gave me the earliest slot on a Saturday morning, which I was like, damn, that's really hard, but I still got there. So they really should see you as a constituent, but be respectful of the limited time they've got, but I would say email them and say, I've got this thing, what's best? Or I wouldn't just turn up at the door. I just don't think they're going to have the headspace for it. They're probably going to be really busy. And again, it shows a little bit of a lack of empathy, because you haven't thought about, are they there? Is this helpful? So put yourself in their shoes.
Thank you, Sarah. Really important to do your research on your individual MP, definitely.
And who doesn't like online stalking people for research?
Very true. So I want to give us at least 10 minutes to break before the next session. So I'll just really quickly wrap up. A massive thank you to Sarah for joining us and for all the work you've put into the pack that we will share with everyone in the chat box shortly. We want all of you guys to have a go at a craftivist, gentle protest approach to letter writing. So please do use the guide, have a go. We've put a link in there to some of the campaign issues we're working on if you're not familiar, and giving you some tips for what would be the most impactful thing to write about. But how you write it is very much open to you guys and your interpretation of Sarah's methodology. So do have a go. We'd love to hear how it goes. Share your images or thoughts on social media as well. I'll put some links in the chat box for that. I'll send a quick follow-up email with all the details to the guide, the campaign page, and anything else that you might need to get started. And we're saying try to do it by the end of September, just so we can see how many gentle protest letters we can get out before the end of the month. So a bit of a challenge for you. Yeah, thanks again to Sarah. It's been so lovely having you. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and craftivist insights with us. And thanks to everyone else for all your participation as well. It's been lovely to hear from you all. Yeah, I guess we will go to break now. Switch your video off, go and have another cup of tea, and we'll see you back here at 3:45 for the Examining Power and Privilege session.